The hot Georgia sun beat down on Fort Benning as the newest group of Army recruits stepped off the bus. Among them stood a young man named David Williams, a 20-year-old from Detroit who had always dreamed of serving his country. He carried his duffel bag with pride, ready to begin the toughest challenge of his life. Sergeant First Class Robert Patterson watched from the training building window as the new recruits lined up. Patterson had been training soldiers for 15 years, and he thought he could spot trouble from a mile away. When his eyes landed on David, something inside him hardened. He didn't like what he saw, and he made up his mind right then that this recruit would need special attention. Patterson had grown up in a small town where old ideas about race still lived in many hearts. His father and grandfather had filled his head with wrong thoughts about people who looked different from him. Even after 15 years in the Army, those poisonous ideas still lived inside him like a sickness he couldn't cure. The first day of basic training started before sunrise. David woke up early, made his bed perfectly, and got ready faster than most of the other recruits. He had always been disciplined, thanks to lessons his mother taught him about working hard and staying focused. But when Patterson walked into the barracks for morning inspection, David's perfect preparation didn't matter. "Williams!" Patterson shouted, stopping right in front of David's bunk. "What do you call this mess?" David looked at his bed, confused. Every corner was tight, every fold was perfect. The other recruits glanced over, equally puzzled. David's bunk looked better than most of the others. "Sir, I don't understand. Could you please show me what's wrong?" David asked politely. Patterson's face turned red with anger. "Don't you dare question me, recruit. Strip this bed and make it again and again and again until you get it right." David did as he was told, remaking his bed 5 times while the other recruits watched. Each time, Patterson found something wrong that nobody else could see. By the time David finished, the rest of the company had already left for breakfast. David would have to go hungry. This became the daily routine. No matter how perfectly David completed a task, Patterson found fault. During weapons cleaning, David's rifle would be dirty even when it sparkled. During uniform inspection, Patterson would claim David's boots weren't shiny enough, even though they reflected like mirrors. The other recruits began to notice, but fear kept them quiet. Tommy Rodriguez, a recruit from Texas who bunked next to David, started paying close attention. Tommy had grown up in a family that taught him about fairness and standing up for what's right. He could see that something was very wrong with how Patterson treated David, but he wasn't sure what to do about it. The harassment got worse each day. During morning exercises, Patterson made David do extra push-ups for no reason. During marching drills, he would yell at David for mistakes that other recruits made. During meal times, Patterson would assign David to kitchen duty, making him clean pots and pans while everyone else ate. "This isn't right," Tommy whispered to his bunkmate one night. "David's the best soldier in our group, but Patterson treats him like garbage." "Keep your voice down," his bunkmate warned. "You don't want Patterson coming after you, too." But Tommy couldn't stay quiet. He started writing down what he saw, keeping careful notes about Patterson's unfair treatment. He wrote down dates, times, and exactly what happened. Something told him this information might be important later. David never complained, not once. When Patterson screamed at him, he stood at attention and took it. When Patterson gave him extra work, he did it without arguing. When other recruits asked him why he didn't fight back, David just said, "This is part of my training, I can handle it." But late at night, when he thought everyone was sleeping, some of the other recruits could hear David quietly talking to a photo he kept in his locker. Nobody could hear what he was saying, but they could tell it was important to him. The photo seemed to give him strength to face another day of Patterson's cruelty. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, the senior trainer in the company, started noticing things too. She had been in the Army for 12 years and had seen tough training before, but something about Patterson's behavior bothered her. She watched how he treated the recruits differently, and she didn't like what she saw. During weapons training, David proved to be an excellent shot. His groupings were tight, his stance was perfect, and he followed every safety rule perfectly. But when Patterson checked his target, he somehow found problems that weren't there. "Terrible shooting, Williams," Patterson announced loudly, even though David had hit the bullseye 8 times out of 10 shots. You'll never be a real soldier with aim like that. The range instructor, Sergeant Collins, looked confused. He had been watching David shoot and knew the young man had natural talent. Collins made a mental note to mention this to Sergeant Santos. Later, the other recruits were starting to respect David more each day. Despite all the extra punishment, he never gave up. He helped other recruits with their training when he could. He shared his snacks when someone was hungry. He encouraged others when they felt like quitting. His quiet strength inspired them, even though they were afraid to show it openly. One evening during a particularly brutal day of training, Patterson had made David clean the entire barracks bathroom with a toothbrush because he claimed David had been disrespectful during formation. David had simply asked for clarification about a command, something any good soldier should do. While David scrubbed the floors on his hands and knees, Private Johnson, a recruit from California, approached Tommy Rodriguez. "This is insane," Johnson whispered. "David's the hardest working guy here, and Patterson treats him like he's the worst. There's got to be something we can do." Tommy showed Johnson his notebook, filled with detailed accounts of Patterson's behavior. "I've been writing everything down," Tommy said. "Maybe someday someone will listen." The next morning brought a new level of harassment. During the obstacle course, Patterson made David carry a heavy backpack while the other recruits ran without extra weight. When David still finished in the top 3, Patterson claimed he had cheated somehow. "You think you're special, don't you, Williams?" Patterson snarled in front of the entire company. "You think the rules don't apply to you?" David stood perfectly, still sweat dripping down his face. "No, sir, I'm just trying to do my best, sir." "Your best isn't good enough," Patterson shouted. "Drop and give me 50 push-ups now." David dropped to the ground and started doing push-ups. At 48, his arms began to shake from exhaustion. At 50, Patterson wasn't done. "Keep going, you'll stop when I tell you to stop." David kept going. 60, 70, 80. The other recruits watched in amazement and growing anger. Some of them wanted to say something, but they knew it would only make things worse for David. Finally, at 90 push-ups, David's arms gave out and he collapsed to the ground. Patterson stood over him with a satisfied smirk. "Pathetic," Patterson said loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is what happens when people think they can take shortcuts in life." That night, as David lay in his bunk with his arm still aching, Tommy Rodriguez made a decision. He couldn't watch this continue without doing something. He decided to find a way to contact someone higher up in the chain of command, someone who might listen and help. David stared at the photo in his locker again, drawing strength from whatever memory it held. He whispered something too quiet for anyone else to hear, but his roommates could see his lips moving in what looked like a promise. The harassment had been going on for 3 weeks now, and it was only getting worse. Patterson seemed to take pleasure in making David's life miserable, finding new ways each day to single him out and humiliate him in front of the other recruits. But David Williams wasn't breaking. If anything, he was getting stronger. Each day of unfair treatment only made him more determined to succeed. He had a reason for being there, a purpose that went deeper than anyone knew. And no amount of cruelty from Patterson was going to make him quit. The other recruits were starting to see David as a leader, even though he never asked for that role. His quiet dignity in the face of unfair treatment inspired them. His willingness to help others despite his own struggles earned their respect. And his refusal to give up no matter what Patterson threw at him showed them what real strength looked like. Tommy Rodriguez finished writing in his notebook that night, documenting another day of Patterson's harassment. He had no idea that his careful record-keeping would soon become very important. He just knew that someone, somewhere, needed to know what was really happening in Alpha Company. As the lights went out in the barracks, David Williams closed his eyes and prepared for another day of challenges. He had no way of knowing that everything was about to change, or that the truth about who he really was would soon shock everyone at Fort Benning. The 4th week of basic training brought the hottest weather Fort Benning had seen all summer. The temperature climbed to 95 degrees before noon, and the humidity made it feel even worse. Most of the drill sergeants adjusted their training schedules, giving recruits more water breaks and moving some activities indoors. But Sergeant Patterson had different plans for David Williams. Listen up, Williams, Patterson barked during the morning formation. While your buddies are doing regular training today, you get special treatment. You're going to carry this extra pack during our field exercise. Patterson held up a rucksack that looked like it weighed at least 40 pounds more than the standard equipment. The other recruits exchanged worried glances. They all knew this wasn't normal, but nobody dared to speak up. David took the heavy pack without complaint. "Yes, sir," he said simply, strapping it to his back along with his regular gear. The total weight was now close to 80 pounds in the blazing heat. Tommy Rodriguez watched from his place in formation, his jaw clenched with anger. He had been documenting Patterson's behavior for weeks now, and this felt like the most dangerous thing yet. Tommy had grown up in Texas heat, and he knew how quickly things could go wrong when someone was pushed too hard in these conditions. The field exercise began at 10 in the morning. The company would march 5 miles, complete various training tasks at different stations, then march back to base. Under normal conditions, it was challenging but manageable. With the extra weight and Patterson's restrictions, it became something else entirely. At the first water break, Patterson made his move. "Everyone else take 5 minutes to hydrate," he announced. Then he turned to David with a cruel smile. "Except you, Williams. You don't look thirsty to me." David had been sweating heavily for the past hour, but he simply nodded and stood at attention while the other recruits drank water and rested in whatever shade they could find. Several recruits wanted to share their water with him, but Patterson was watching too closely. Staff Sergeant Santos noticed what was happening from her position with the other instructors. She had been keeping an eye on Patterson's behavior ever since she started noticing his unfair treatment of David. This water restriction in extreme heat crossed a line she couldn't ignore. "Patterson," she called out, walking over to where he stood. "All recruits need proper hydration in this weather. That's not a suggestion, it's a safety requirement." Patterson's face darkened with anger at being questioned in front of the recruits. "I know how to train soldiers, Santos. This one needs to learn that the Army isn't a summer camp. Safety protocols aren't negotiable," Santos replied firmly. "Williams, get some water now." David gratefully accepted a water bottle from Santos, drinking deeply while Patterson glared at both of them. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, and every recruit could feel it. The march continued, but Patterson's anger at being challenged only made him more determined to break David. At each station, he assigned David extra tasks. While other recruits practiced one skill, David had to do that skill plus additional exercises. The heavy pack never came off his back. By the third hour, David was showing clear signs of heat exhaustion. His face was flushed red, sweat poured down his face despite the fact that his body was starting to dehydrate, and his movements were becoming slightly unsteady. But he kept going, driven by an inner strength that amazed everyone watching. Tommy Rodriguez had seen enough. During a brief moment when Patterson was distracted with another group, Tommy moved closer to David. "You don't look good, man," Tommy whispered. "Maybe you should say something." David shook his head slightly. "I can handle it," he whispered back, though his voice was weaker than usual. "I have to." The final station of the exercise was the most physically demanding. Recruits had to low crawl under barbed wire, then sprint 50 yards, then complete a series of combat moves. When David's turn came, Patterson made his announcement. "Williams gets to do this station twice," Patterson declared. "Since he thinks he's so special, he can show us all how it's done." The other drill sergeants looked uncomfortable. Even some of them could see that David was reaching his limits. But Patterson outranked them, and military hierarchy meant they couldn't directly contradict him. David completed the first round of the obstacle, moving slower than usual but still finishing. His breathing was labored, and he swayed slightly when he stood up. The smart thing would have been to rest, to ask for medical attention, to admit he needed help. Instead, David lined up to do it again. "You don't have to prove anything to him," Private Johnson whispered as David prepared for the second round. "Everyone here knows you're tough." David looked at Johnson with eyes that seemed to carry more weight than just the heavy pack on his back. "Yes, I do," he said quietly. "More than you know." The second round was a disaster waiting to happen. David started the low crawl under the barbed wire, but his movements were jerky and uncontrolled. His body was shutting down from the heat and dehydration. Halfway through the crawl, he stopped moving. "Get up, Williams," Patterson shouted. "You're not done yet." But David couldn't get up. His body had finally reached its breaking point. He lay motionless under the wire, his breathing shallow and rapid. Tommy Rodriguez was the first to react. He ducked under the barbed wire and reached David just as the young man's eyes rolled back in his head. "Medic!" Tommy shouted at the top of his lungs. "We need a medic right now." Staff Sergeant Santos was already running toward them, along with several other instructors. Patterson stood frozen, suddenly realizing that his harassment had gone too far. The other recruits gathered around, their faces filled with concern for their fellow soldier. The base medics arrived within minutes, quickly assessing David's condition. Heat exhaustion, severe dehydration, and physical exhaustion had combined to shut down his body's systems. They immediately started IV fluids and began cooling procedures. "This recruit needs immediate transport to the medical facility," the lead medic announced. "His core temperature is dangerously high." As David was loaded into the ambulance, still unconscious, Tommy Rodriguez made a decision that would change everything. He walked directly to Staff Sergeant Santos, his notebook in his hand. "Sergeant Santos," Tommy said, his voice shaking with emotion, "I need to show you something. I've been documenting what's been happening to David for weeks now." Santos took the notebook and quickly scanned the detailed entries. Date after date of harassment, unfair treatment, and escalating abuse. The pattern was clear and undeniable. "Why? Didn't you come forward sooner?" Santos asked. "I was scared," Tommy admitted. "But I can't stay quiet anymore. What happened today could have killed him." Word of David's collapse spread quickly through the base. In the medical facility, doctors worked to stabilize his condition while his fellow recruits waited anxiously for news. The incident had shaken everyone, even some of the instructors who had remained silent about Patterson's behavior. Captain James Wheeler, the company commander, arrived at the medical facility within an hour of the incident. He was a fair man who took the welfare of his soldiers seriously, and the news of a recruit collapsing during training demanded his immediate attention. "What's the recruit's condition?" Wheeler asked the attending doctor. "He'll recover, but it was close," the doctor replied. "Another 15 minutes in that heat without treatment, and we might be having a very different conversation. This level of heat exhaustion doesn't happen from normal training, especially not to a recruit who's shown excellent physical fitness scores." Wheeler's expression grew serious. "What are you saying, doctor?" "I'm saying someone pushed this young man beyond reasonable limits. The circumstances that led to this collapse need to be investigated." While David recovered in the medical facility, Patterson was trying to control the narrative back at the barracks. He gathered the recruits and made his position clear. "What happened today was an accident," Patterson announced. "Williams pushed himself too hard trying to show off. Some people just aren't cut out for military service." But the recruits weren't buying it anymore. They had all seen what really happened. They had watched David endure weeks of unfair treatment without complaint. They knew he hadn't been showing off. He had been pushed beyond human limits by a drill sergeant with a personal agenda. Private Johnson stood up, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "That's not what happened, sir. David was carrying extra weight and wasn't allowed water breaks. We all saw it." Other recruits began nodding and murmuring their agreement. For the first time since basic training began, they were finding their voices to stand up for what was right. Patterson's face turned red with rage. "Are you questioning my training methods, recruit?" "We're telling the truth, sir," Johnson replied. "And the truth is that David Williams is the best soldier in this company, and he was treated unfairly." The unity among the recruits was something Patterson hadn't expected. He had counted on fear to keep them quiet. But David's courage in the face of harassment had inspired them all. They were no longer afraid to speak up. Back in the medical facility, David slowly regained consciousness. His first words were not complaints about his treatment or requests for help. Instead, he asked about his fellow recruits. "Did everyone else finish the exercise okay?" he asked the nurse. "I don't want my situation to cause problems for the others." The nurse was amazed by his concern for others even after his own medical emergency. "Everyone else is fine, honey. You need to focus on getting better." David closed his eyes and touched something hanging around his neck, dog tags that he kept tucked under his shirt. The nurse noticed them but didn't think much of it. Many recruits wore family members' tags for inspiration. Captain Wheeler was already planning his investigation when Staff Sergeant Santos knocked on his office door. She entered with Tommy Rodriguez's notebook and a grim expression. "Sir, I believe we have a serious problem with Sergeant Patterson's training methods," she began. Wheeler listened carefully as Santos presented the evidence of systematic harassment. The pattern was clear, documented, and deeply troubling. This wasn't tough training. It was personal persecution that had nearly cost a young man his life. "Get me Patterson's complete service record," Wheeler ordered, "and I want statements from every recruit in that company. If this is true, it ends now." As David rested in the medical facility, surrounded by get-well cards from his fellow recruits, he had no idea that his quiet strength had finally inspired others to take action. The truth about Patterson's behavior was about to come out, but an even bigger truth about David himself was waiting to be discovered. The investigation that would follow would shock everyone at Fort Benning and reveal secrets that no one saw coming. Captain Wheeler wasted no time starting his investigation. By the next morning, he had assembled a team that included Staff Sergeant Santos, the base chaplain, and a representative from the Inspector General's office. The seriousness of the situation was clear to everyone involved. The first step was interviewing the recruits. One by one, they were called into a private room where they could speak freely without fear of retaliation. What Wheeler heard shocked him to his core. Private Johnson was among the first to testify. His hands shook slightly as he described weeks of watching David endure unfair treatment. "Sir, David never complained, not once. But we all saw what Sergeant Patterson was doing. It wasn't normal training. It was personal." Tommy Rodriguez presented his detailed notebook, 3 weeks of careful documentation that painted a clear picture of systematic harassment. "I started writing everything down because I knew someone needed to witness what was happening," Tommy explained. David deserved better than what he was getting. Each recruit's story confirmed the same pattern. Extra punishment for David? Impossible. Standards that applied only to him, verbal abuse disguised as training, and finally the dangerous conditions that led to his collapse. The evidence was overwhelming. While the interviews continued, Captain Wheeler decided to review security footage from the training areas. What he saw on those recordings made his blood boil. There was Patterson, clearly singling out David for treatment that no other recruit received. The cameras captured everything: the unfair inspections, the excessive physical punishment, the denial of water breaks. But as Wheeler dug deeper into Patterson's background, he discovered something that made the situation even more troubling. This wasn't Patterson's first assignment where complaints had been made about his behavior toward minority soldiers. There had been incidents at his previous base that were quietly handled through transfers and reassignments. How did this man keep getting promoted? Wheeler asked Santos as they reviewed Patterson's service record. "Old boys network," Santos replied grimly. "Some people in the system protected him because they thought his tough training methods got results. They ignored the complaints or dismissed them as recruits making excuses. Meanwhile, David was recovering in the base medical facility. The doctors were amazed by his physical resilience and positive attitude. Despite everything he had endured, he showed no bitterness or anger. When visitors came to check on him, he asked about his fellow recruits and expressed concern about missing training time. "I need to get back to my unit," David told the attending physician. "My team is counting on me." "Son, you nearly died from heat exhaustion," the doctor replied. "Your body needs time to recover. Besides, there are some people who want to talk to you about what happened." David's expression grew serious. "I don't want to cause trouble for anyone. I knew what I was signing up for when I joined the Army." Doctor sat down beside David's bed. "What you experienced wasn't normal military training. No drill sergeant has the right to put a recruit's life in danger because of personal prejudice. When Captain Wheeler arrived to interview David, he expected to find a bitter young man ready to file complaints and seek revenge. Instead, he found someone whose maturity and wisdom seemed far beyond his 20 years. "Tell me what happened during your training," Wheeler said gently. David was quiet for a long moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Sir, Sergeant Patterson was hard on me, maybe harder than on the others. But I understood that military training is supposed to be difficult." "David," Wheeler said, using his first name to create a more personal connection, "what happened to you went far beyond difficult training. You could have died out there." David's hand instinctively moved to the dog tags hanging around his neck, tags that he kept hidden under his shirt. "Sir, I've learned that sometimes life tests us in ways we don't expect. How we respond to those tests shows who we really are." Wheeler was struck by the young man's composure and wisdom. There was something about David that reminded him of seasoned soldiers he had known, men who had faced real combat and emerged with quiet strength and dignity. "David, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Do you believe Sergeant Patterson treated you unfairly because of your race?" David was quiet again, staring at the ceiling. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but clear. "Sir, I believe Sergeant Patterson treated me the way he did because of who he thought I was, not because of who I actually am." The answer was cryptic, but Wheeler sensed there was more to this young recruit than met the eye. Something about David's manner, his way of speaking, his bearing. It all suggested a background that went deeper than a typical 20-year-old from Detroit. While David recovered, the investigation was uncovering disturbing truths about Patterson's behavior. Other drill sergeants came forward to admit they had witnessed the unfair treatment but had remained silent. Some felt guilty about their inaction, while others had been afraid to challenge Patterson's authority. Sergeant Collins, the weapons instructor, was particularly upset with himself. "I saw that David was an excellent marksman, but Patterson kept claiming his performance was poor. I should have said something. I should have protected that kid." The base chaplain, Father Murphy, had also noticed something during his regular visits to the training companies. David often came to evening services, Murphy told the investigators. He prayed quietly, alone, and he carried himself with unusual dignity for someone so young. There was something special about him, something that went beyond typical recruit behavior. As more people came forward, a picture emerged of David as an exceptional young man who had earned the respect of everyone except the one person with power over his daily life. His fellow recruits looked up to him, instructors admired his skills, and even civilian staff on the base had noticed his politeness and maturity. The investigation took an unexpected turn when the base's intelligence officer, Major Thompson, requested a private meeting with Captain Wheeler. Thompson looked nervous as he entered Wheeler's office carrying a classified file. "Captain, I need to share some information that changes everything about this case," Thompson began. "When I ran David Williams' background check for security, clearance purposes, some interesting connections came up." Thompson opened the file and showed Wheeler a series of documents. David Williams isn't just any recruit. His father was Command Sergeant Major Robert Williams, one of the most decorated soldiers of the last 20 years. Wheeler's eyes widened as he read the file. Command Sergeant Major Williams had been a legend in the Army, a soldier's soldier, who had earned the Medal of Honor for extraordinary heroism in Afghanistan. He had been killed in action 3 years earlier, while saving his entire unit from an enemy ambush. David enlisted under his mother's maiden name. Thompson continued. He specifically requested that his father's identity be kept classified. He wanted to earn his place in the Army based on his own merit, not his father's reputation. The revelation hit Wheeler like a physical blow. Patterson had been torturing the son of one of the Army's greatest heroes, a man who had died defending the very values that Patterson claimed to represent. "Does anyone else know about this?" Wheeler asked. "Only the people with high enough clearance to access the classified files," Thompson replied. "David has kept his identity secret from everyone, including his fellow recruits and the training staff." Wheeler immediately understood the full scope of what had happened. David had endured weeks of harassment and nearly died from heat exhaustion, all while carrying the weight of his father's legacy in secret. He could have revealed his identity at any time to stop the abuse, but he had chosen to suffer in silence rather than use his father's name for protection. The next day, Wheeler visited David in the medical facility again. This time, he brought Major Thompson with him. David's expression grew wary when he saw the intelligence officer. "David, we need to talk about your father," Wheeler said gently. David's composure finally cracked slightly. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath before responding. "I was hoping to keep that private, sir." "Why?" Wheeler asked. "Your father was a hero. His reputation could have protected you from what you endured." David sat up straighter in his hospital bed, and for a moment Wheeler could see the father's strength in the son's bearing. "Sir, my father earned his respect through his actions, not his name. I wanted to do the same. If I had used his reputation to get special treatment, I wouldn't have been honoring his memory." The room fell silent as the full weight of David's sacrifice became clear. He had endured systematic harassment and life-threatening abuse rather than compromise his principles or trade on his father's heroic legacy. "Your father would be proud of you," Major Thompson said quietly. David nodded, touching his hidden dog tags again. "I carry his tags with me, sir. They remind me every day of the standard I'm trying to live up to. Sometimes that means enduring things that others might not understand." Word of David's true identity began to spread through the base's command structure, though it remained classified information that couldn't be shared with the general population. Senior officers who had served with Command Sergeant Major Williams were shocked and ashamed that his son had been treated so poorly. Colonel Harasses, the base commander, called an emergency meeting of all senior staff. "Gentlemen, we have a serious problem. One of our drill sergeants has been systematically harassing the son of a Medal of Honor recipient. This young man nearly died because of prejudice and abuse that should never exist in our Army." The investigation was now moving at full speed toward its inevitable conclusion. Patterson's career was over and criminal charges were being prepared. But more importantly, David Williams was about to receive the recognition and respect he had earned through his own courage and character. The truth was finally coming out, and it would change everything for everyone involved. David's secret was safe for now, but soon the whole world would know about the remarkable young man who had honored his father's memory by refusing to let hatred and prejudice break his spirit. The court-martial proceedings began 2 weeks after David's collapse. The base courtroom was packed with officers, soldiers, and legal personnel, all there to witness what many considered the most important military justice case Fort Benning had seen in years. Sergeant Patterson sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller and older than he had during his years of terrorizing recruits. His military lawyer had advised him to show remorse, but Patterson's pride made it difficult for him to accept that his actions were wrong. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. Video evidence showed Patterson's unfair treatment of David. Written testimony from dozens of witnesses painted a clear picture of systematic harassment. Medical records proved that David's life had been endangered by Patterson's reckless disregard for safety protocols. But the most powerful moment came when Tommy Rodriguez took the witness stand. The young man from Texas held his notebook tightly as he described weeks of watching his friend suffer in silence. "David never once complained," Tommy testified, his voice strong and clear. "He took everything Sergeant Patterson threw at him and kept going. He inspired all of us to be better soldiers, even while he was being treated terribly unfairly." One by one, David's fellow recruits testified about his character, his leadership, and his quiet strength. They described how he helped struggling recruits with their training, shared his food when others were hungry, and encouraged everyone to keep going when times got tough. Private Johnson's testimony was particularly moving. "Sir, David Williams is the best soldier I've ever known. He never asked for special treatment, never complained about unfair punishment, and never let Sergeant Patterson's cruelty make him bitter or angry. If that's not what a real soldier looks like, then I don't know what is." The defense tried to argue that Patterson's training methods were simply tough but effective. They brought in character witnesses who spoke about his 15 years of service and his previous commendations. But their arguments fell apart when confronted with the overwhelming evidence of targeted harassment. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. David Williams was called to testify. David entered the courtroom in his dress uniform, walking with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout his ordeal. As he took the oath, everyone could see the strength and maturity that had impressed so many people during his time at Fort Benning. The prosecutor began with basic questions about the harassment David had endured. David answered each question honestly, but without bitterness, describing Patterson's actions as facts rather than personal attacks. "Private Williams," the prosecutor said, "why didn't you report Sergeant Patterson's treatment earlier?" David was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Sir, I believed that enduring difficult treatment was part of my training. I thought if I could handle whatever was thrown at me, I would become a better soldier. Even when that treatment became life-threatening. Sir, I've learned that sometimes we face tests in life that seem impossible. How we respond to those tests shows who we really are inside." The defense attorney tried to break David's composure during cross-examination, suggesting that he had been weak, that he had complained privately, that he had somehow brought the treatment on himself. But David remained calm and respectful, never rising to the bait or showing anger. Then the defense made a crucial mistake. "Private Williams, isn't it true that you felt entitled to special treatment because of your background?" David's expression grew serious. He looked directly at Patterson for the first time during the trial. "Sir, I never asked for special treatment. I never wanted anyone to know about my background. I came to the Army to earn my place based on my own actions and character, nothing else." The defense attorney, not understanding the significance of David's words, pressed further. "What background are you referring to, Private Williams?" David hesitated, glancing at the military judge who nodded encouragingly. "Sir, my father was Command Sergeant Major Robert Williams. He was killed in Afghanistan 3 years ago." The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Many of the officers present had known Command Sergeant Major Williams personally. He was a legend in the Army, a soldier who had embodied everything the military stood for. Patterson's face went white as the full weight of what he had done hit him. He had spent weeks tormenting the son of one of the Army's greatest heroes, a man who had died defending the very values Patterson claimed to represent. The military judge called for order, then addressed David directly. "Private Williams, why didn't you reveal your father's identity when the harassment began?" David stood straighter, and everyone in the courtroom could see his father's strength shining through. "Sir, my father earned respect through his actions, not his name. I wanted to honor his memory by doing the same. Using his reputation to protect myself would have been dishonoring everything he stood for." The impact of David's words was immediate and profound. Several officers in the courtroom had tears in their eyes. Patterson slumped in his chair, finally understanding the magnitude of his cruelty. David's mother, Dr. Linda Mitchell, had been called to testify about her son's character. She was a professor at Wayne State University in Detroit, a woman who had raised her son alone after her husband's death, while dealing with her own grief. "My son chose to enlist under my maiden name because he wanted to serve his country on his own terms," she testified. "Robert always taught David that respect must be earned, never given freely. David was living by his father's principles, even when it cost him greatly." The prosecution's final witness was Colonel Harrison, the base commander. Harrison had served with Command Sergeant Major Williams in Iraq and spoke about the fallen hero's character and values. "Robert Williams was the finest soldier I ever knew," Harrison testified. He would have been incredibly proud of his son's conduct during this ordeal. David Williams showed the same courage, dignity, and honor that made his father a legend. When it came time for Patterson to testify in his own defense, he struggled to find words. His lawyer had prepared him to show remorse, but facing David and learning about his father's identity had shaken Patterson to his core. I didn't know," Patterson stammered. "If I had known who his father was." The prosecutor cut him off. "Sergeant Patterson, should it matter who Private Williams's father was? Should any recruit be subjected to the treatment you inflicted on him? Patterson couldn't answer. For the first time in his military career, he was facing the truth about his own prejudices and the harm they had caused. The military judge's verdict was swift and decisive. Patterson was found guilty on all charges: conduct unbecoming a non-commissioned officer, abuse of authority, violation of equal opportunity policies, and endangering the life of a soldier under his command. The sentence was equally harsh: reduction in rank to private, forfeiture of all pay and benefits, and dismissal from the Army with less than honorable discharge. Patterson's 15-year military career was over in disgrace, but the most powerful moment came when David was given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing. He stood and looked directly at Patterson, who couldn't meet his eyes. "Sir, I don't hate Sergeant Patterson," David said, his voice carrying throughout the silent courtroom. "Hatred would dishonor my father's memory and the values he died defending. I believe that people can change, that they can learn from their mistakes and become better than they were." David paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "My father taught me that our Army is strongest when we stand together, regardless of the color of our skin or where we come from. I hope someday Sergeant Patterson will understand that and find a way to make amends for what he's done." The grace and maturity David showed in that moment left everyone speechless. Even Patterson looked up, tears streaming down his face as he faced the forgiveness he didn't deserve from the young man he had nearly destroyed. After the court-martial, David returned to complete his basic training with a different company. Word of his identity and his conduct during the trial had spread throughout the base, and he was treated with the respect he had always deserved. During the graduation ceremony 6 weeks later, David was selected as the honor graduate for his class. As he stood at attention to receive the award, he finally revealed his father's dog tags, wearing them proudly over his dress uniform. "Colonel." Harrison presented the award personally. "Private Williams," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "your father would be incredibly proud of the soldier and the man you've become. You've honored his memory and shown us all what true courage looks like." 2 years later, David was serving with distinction in his father's former unit overseas. He had become a sergeant himself and was known for his fair treatment of all soldiers under his command regardless of their background. Meanwhile, Patterson's life had taken a difficult turn after his dismissal from the Army. He struggled to find work and fell into depression, haunted by the memory of David's words about forgiveness and redemption. Eventually, Patterson began attending counseling sessions at a veterans center. Slowly, painfully, he began to confront the prejudices that had destroyed his career and nearly cost a young man his life. He started volunteering with civil rights organizations, trying to make amends for the harm he had caused. 3 years after the court-martial, Patterson encountered David at a veterans memorial event. David was in uniform, now a staff sergeant, visiting his father's name on the memorial wall. Patterson approached nervously, unsure if he would be welcomed or rejected. "Sergeant Williams," Patterson said quietly, using David's current rank, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that your words at the trial changed my life. I've been working to become a better person, to understand the harm my prejudice caused." David turned and studied Patterson's face, seeing genuine remorse and change. After a long moment, he extended his hand. "We all have the capacity to grow and change," David said as they shook hands. "My father believed that redemption was possible for anyone willing to do the hard work of becoming better." The two men talked for nearly an hour, Patterson sharing his journey of self-discovery, and David offering encouragement for continued growth. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a beginning. As David walked away from the memorial, that day he touched his father's dog tags and smiled. He had not only survived his trial by fire, but had emerged stronger, wiser, and more committed than ever to the values his father had died defending. The Army was better because of soldiers like David Williams, men and women who proved that character, courage, and dignity could overcome hatred and prejudice. His story became legend at Fort Benning, inspiring future generations of soldiers to stand up for what's right and never give up in the face of adversity. David's quiet strength had not only saved himself, but had helped redeem another man's soul, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating our enemies, but from helping them become better than they were.